Hello. I'm going to talk about the far right today because I had a very interesting altercation last night, which I already knew the pattern of and I've dealt with a million times. So I'm going to link three things in this video: co-option, the far right, and grooming in Keighley. So when I was working in Keighley with sexual exploitation, when I was having to realise the scale of this, one of the biggest barriers and the biggest problems that we had was the far right, fascists. Men like Nick Griffin turned up in Keighley, you can check. There was a documentary by a woman called Anna Hall called Edge of the City, which was filmed in our office, and it detailed how these crumbling systems were doing harm, and it observed. And the cumulative picture in that documentary was terrible. It was fucking terrible, but it was banal and it wasn't interesting. But the far right picked up on one thing, on one case that was featured, and that was a Pakistani perpetrator. Now, people who abuse and rape and allow harm and abuse do so because they have reduced the people being harmed to objects, and this is what the fascists and far right did with those girls. And so this is the stuff that you don't hear about in the news. When people say that they didn't touch CSE because of fear of being called racist, it wasn't fear of being called racist. It's an impossibility to have a fear of race and difference in a city like Bradford. Now, partly I think it's a euphemism for two things. One is that people don't know how to explain that they didn't see someone as a person and that they didn't see what was in front of them. And the other is about the far right. Now, in the period during that period, I knew what happened to the girls where the far right targeted them and they didn't obey. The girls they called packy shaggers. And I know about the rapes, and I know about the harm that was done. So I have no time for fascists. Now, basically, I will always stand up to the far left and the far right, because the far right and the far left are just boils on the same arse cheek, really. They're just exactly the same. It's a false identity, usually adopted by very stupid and very toxic people who are dangerous. Now, the person that I dealt with last night, I have watched over a number of months, and I've watched her bully, and I've watched her send snidey DMs to target people, and I've watched her try to conflate the persecution that women are actually experiencing, the harm that women are actually experiencing with her far right views. And she spent quite a considerable time. She ended up telling me, apparently, like, if you want to protect children, you don't spend your time learning about abuse patterns and safeguarding and systems, and you don't actually learn to see those children as people. What you have to do is support Tommy Robinson, who's a fascist thug. And by the time this woman had finished, she had demanded that we did not talk about child abuse, that we did not talk about equality being rolled back for working class women. Me as a working class woman, I have nothing to say on the white working class, because she wanted to talk about Tommy Robinson. But in order to talk about Tommy Robinson, she decided to exploit child rape on an industrial scale and to do what the fascists did in Keighley. So I was quite clear with this woman that this wasn't new, that this was not interesting, that her reduction of those girls to an object and her demand that we viewed abuse solely through which perpetrators she liked was a demand to not see child abuse, and that what she was displaying was the mechanism that people use to not believe children. Now, what happens in situations like the one we're in, when so many women have to stand together, is not only do we have to stand with women who are very different from us, very different positions in the world, very different views, very different politics. Now, I will never throw a woman under a bus. I think any one of a number of Muslim women I know could quite happily challenge Posy Parker, and I'm quite sure she'd take it. But fascism is very, very different. Fascism is not about free speech, and the far right are not about free speech, because they're like the far left. And free speech involves the right to tell a fascist who is telling you that she is a fascist, who is telling you that she is far right, that exploiting child rape for the far right just makes you a cunt. It makes you really disgusting. Now, I believe really strongly in standing shoulder to shoulder with women, but that means standing up to the far left, and it also means standing up to the far right. Now, I will not stand with the far right. I will not put myself in a position where in 5 years' time somebody could say to me, but you appeared quite close to this person on the far right, because I know what the far right are. And if you were a woman willing to do that to rape victims, to women, on behalf of Tommy Robinson and his thugs, then I'd really take a good hard look at yourself. But I am not required to respect the identity that you choose. If you choose to be a fascist, you choose association with the far right, then normal, civilised, decent human beings will tell you that you are a fascist and a racist. Now, fascism is not a word that means I do not like people who don't think like me, and I don't think it should be used that way. But fascist does have a meaning. And if you identify as a fascist, and you identify as far right, and you tell people that you are that, and then you exploit child rape for the likes of Tommy Robinson, then freedom of speech means people get to tell you that you are disgusting, and that normal civilised people would never stand with you. Now, I am very fortunate in this situation. I know that a lot of women are worried about joining in, because it's scary when so many people are standing up, and because there are quite a few people at the centre of it who are named, even though they're all taking millions of shit. People think it's a clique, or that it's not. I'm not connected with Women's Place UK, although I fully support them. I'm not connected with We Need to Talk, although fucking huge solidarity to everybody involved. The work that I've done, once I realised what was going on in Keighley, was I undertook an 8-year analysis of what had gone wrong with that system. And I made sure that 2 years ago, on record, at the LSE, and at a number of other institutions, that the reflex to strip back at those services and keep those girls invisible was on record. Now, the reason that I did that was because even though it didn't look likely at the time, I knew that the minute women stood up, which I was fairly sure that you would, that reflex would be demonstrated. And it is being demonstrated, because I'm very good at that. That's the key of a social work assessment. You identify an abusive reflex, and then it generates crisis, and the crisis validates your hypothesis. So more or less all the work that I've done is done, past tense, and was just waiting for women to stand up to kind of activate it. And that's happened, and I am profoundly grateful for that. And I am profoundly grateful that my work of the last 8 years will not go to waste. And I'm profoundly honoured that that reflex will help turn the demands that we examine self-ID into policy responses. I'm very proud of that. And, but that also means that even if I didn't do anything now, I wouldn't be reliant on, social network. Now, women will stand with me because women are awesome, and they just will. But that means that I'm in a very privileged position, because I am not dependent on anybody else to do what I need to do, which means that I can stand up to fascism. Now, I believe unity is really important, but unity is not uniformity of thought. Solidarity is not uniformity of thought. We all have very different opinions. But solidarity requires standing up to the far left and the far right when they try to tar us with their disgusting brush. So I'm not here to apologise. I'm here to be clear that if you identify yourself as a fascist, and then you exploit child rape for men like Tommy Robinson, I don't give a fuck how much bleating you do about women. You are a disgusting human being, and you are somebody with a set of political beliefs which are not about freedom of speech, but which are about control and harming other people. And unity rather depends on some of us being able to point that out and say that's not okay. So this person did what all people with that identity do. And she did what the left did, and she did what TRAs did. She did a little spin out, and while simultaneously revealing that yes, the problem was I had insulted the far right, she got a bit shirty. So I'm going to say this clear, here and now. If you choose to identify yourself as a fascist, if you choose to exploit child rape for the far right, then freedom of speech is incredibly important. it is incredibly important that you can air those views, and it is incredibly important that women can look at you and say, that is disgusting, and you are disgusting, and I do not stand or associate with fascists. I am never ever beguiled by false notions of unity, which involve allowing that to flourish. So this video is making my position clear. I stood up when Posey Parker was thrown under a bus because that was exposing a woman to abuse to control her speech by the far left. I am not fooled by the far right doing the same. So, to a person who shall remain nameless, you can do what you like and you can play your little games, but we see you. And if you choose to identify yourself as a fascist and you choose to exploit child rape for the far right, I'm not really scared of you. And I can see that, and so can others.